Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another podcast episode by CSM Practice. When you know that you're going to know and going to learn a lot of cool stuff here on our podcast, anything related to scaling your customer success journey and bringing maximum value to your customers. But today we're going to double down on how do you do it in a scalable way. But if you have hundreds of customers or thousands of customers and you have a dire need to do this in a scalable way, maybe your ARR is relatively smaller. This is the podcast episode you want to listen to. We're going to talk about how do you do digital CS? What is scale CS? What is the difference between pooled model and a portfolio CSM? Why do you need that in additional to what we used to call tech touch? I have the right person to come in and talk to you about this because she's been implementing digital CS for 5 years now. And this is the third company. She's actually starting this engagement model and working on it. So she's able to tell us how to start, what is like a maturity model for digital CS, lessons learned, should community play part in it? I can't wait to dive in. Marie Lunney, thank you so much for coming to us all the way from Europe.
Hi, Irene. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Let's talk about digital CS for a minute here. From your experience, what are the strengths of the digital CS? Like when companies are thinking about developing that kind of engagement model, what are the key things or key outcomes that they should expect from this approach?
Companies have two different reasons usually for creating a digital customer success program. So, one, I think, is the most common one, which is we have this long tail of customers. We need to serve them more effectively, more efficiently, and have less human capital spent on these customers who maybe are not paying our bills. That's a harsh way to say it, but business is business. So, what is the strategy that we can serve those customers without sacrificing their actual customer experience? And that's through the scaled or digital customer success model. The second is what I'm seeing actually more and more companies do, which is leading with digital customer success as their customer success strategy, or even larger companies investing in it, not because it's driving from a long tail of customers, but because they want to proactively serve their customers better and give them a better customer experience. So the ultimate outcomes are driving value for your customers, which ultimately is going to mitigate churn and drive expansion.
Before we started this session, you said, well, it's to augment value, increase the experience, improve the experience, increase adoption. What is it not? What's kind of like some of the disbeliefs that companies and executives sometimes have around digital CS that you kind of wish to bust at this moment?
A lot of kind of older school, especially if you have a revenue background, whether it's sales or CS, the focus is always on the money and renewal and expansion. As CS leaders, we've all felt the fire drill, and we're all on this mission to become more proactive in how we operate as CSMs and are able to, instead of fight these fires, we're able to proactively consult our customers. When building out a digital customer success program, typically it's that same mindset that's applied to this program. So CSMs, we need you to go against your up for renewal accounts and mitigate any risk by calling and getting them on meetings. Now, as a digital method through email and in-app engagement and different content sources, one-to-many workshops, networking programs, we're going to try to do the same. We're going to mitigate risk for upcoming renewals. And the results of that is poor when you apply those channels against kind of this deep-rooted or existing risk on accounts. It can cause a lot of frustration for the people who are building out these programs and disappointment for the executives who are looking for the results. So I definitely encourage anyone who's building out a program like this, set expectations up front of what this program is and can do, which is drive value for new customers coming on board, identify early risk, and mitigate, taking those first initial steps to mitigate that early risk.
Got it. Almost like a prevention plan and a little bit of triage.
Exactly.
Right. You've implemented digital CS multiple times. You're already in the midst of implementing it right now. You just started at another company like a couple
Yeah,
months ago or so.
that's right. Back in February. So first full quarter of executing.
How many times have you started a digital CS motion for a company?
Yeah, so this is my third time. Second time with scaled or digital customer success, actually, in the title. The first time was teetering on that. It was about 5 years ago. I feel like digital customer success wasn't quite a coined term yet. And I was a post sale product marketer. So my job was to drive onboarding, adoption, retention, and expansion through marketing channels, which effectively is very close to what digital customer success is.
So, in your experience and what we know in the market, what kind of impact should we expect when implementing digital CS? And how much of an impact do we actually see so that it's kind of like a benchmark for us to know whether our digital CS motion is actually doing well relatively to others?
So typically within revenue, increasing your revenue between 4 to 8% seems small, but if you quantify that across ARR in your accounts, it's quite significant. Related to that is retention. So around 7% increase in retention. A big outcome is decrease in service costs. So you're targeting that EBITDA. So 33% decrease in service costs. And lastly, added bonus is referral rates. So referral rates go up exponentially at 94%, ultimately leading to new business.
Well, Maria, I got to ask you, not your first rodeo. Now that you're approaching creating this program again, do you have these kind of lagging indicators in mind as you're designing your digital CS approach and thinking about what data you need to collect so that it can prove the efficacy of your new initiatives?
Definitely. So it's one of the first things I implemented at my current company. And I took that from lessons learned at my previous company. So I have a scorecard for my team that we fill out monthly and quarterly and review our progress month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year. And so it starts with the activities that we're doing. So things like how many emails are we actually writing, or playbooks that we're creating, or lessons for our customers to be able to take, and then the leading indicators of how those activities are performing and the lagging outcomes on our bottom line. So particularly if you're taking a strategy of trying to improve adoption and retention of your long tail of customers, I would recommend you focus on measuring that to see what the effect is.
So, what I'm hearing is on the one hand, you have leading indicators or behavioral indicators. Are we doing what we need to do? The second cohort of KPIs is, does it have any kind of immediate impact on adoption? And then you have another cohort of KPIs, which is, does it have an impact on the bottom line? EBITDA, you mentioned. I like to also track cost to serve. We know the industry standard for cost to serve is about 6% for support and customer success. So that could be a nice benchmark to have. You can also track CSAT and things like that, the more leading indicators. But ultimately, we're looking at retention. Is churn down? Do we get more new business because advocacy is up? How many online reviews and referrals are we getting? So just wanted to throw that out there because sometimes when we know what the impact is, we know what our goals are, we can design a program that leads that, and we can get the behavior, the transformation done in a way that people collect the right data so that we can prove the value. It's hard to get more budget if you don't prove the value.
Mm-hmm.
What I would love to ask you, you've already done it a couple of times. For your third time, how do you pick what are you going to launch first? What are your typically like quick wins just so you could show momentum?
So, a consistent one is mapping your customer journey. So, typically, these customer journeys aren't mapped, which, as someone in this field, I'm always surprised by. I'm like, how do you not know what you need your customers to do at every step of the way in your service delivery with them? So, that's step one, is to get your map. I think this is also a great quick win to establish cross functional relationships. So I've always ran workshops with different folks that are involved in each step of the customer phase, emphasize that they're the subject matter expertise versus me as a new person coming in. So it builds that relationship. I get the information that I need to understand what's the operations currently. And then I involve them as well in what opportunities do they see for improvement. Typically, these people have seen it all and are hungry for someone to listen. So you get a lot of insights early on into understanding where are the biggest pain points and where is the biggest opportunity for improvement. So once you have that customer journey mapped, Then it starts to vary depending on where I am. One big thing that I would encourage everyone to do is not make assumptions for your customers. So I've deployed customer surveys or worked with our user research teams to do some user research, understand what they're interested in, what resources do they feel like they're lacking. And you'll be surprised. I've changed our digital customer success roadmap based off of customer insight to go from, okay, we're going to launch a community. Actually, no, they're more interested in getting university content and prescriptive, deep product content so they can adopt our product better, and they can also get a stamp on their resume that they're an expert in our product, rather than looking for best practices from other customers or networking opportunities with other customers or peer-to-peer support. So definitely lean on your customers before you start building.
Yeah, what an important aspect. Just be customer centric and not assume anything. Well, now that you've collected all this information, and hopefully you're done with that phase. By the way, we have two more videos on our channel, on our podcast, where we have Irene Lefton and Duda Setadeep go through their first 90 days as customer success executives. If you want to learn more about what typically executives do in the first 90 days, echoes what you're doing right now, Marie. So I highly encourage you to go ahead and watch those videos as well. Well, once you have a good understanding of the journey, map it, and then validate the pain points and what works and what doesn't with the customers, what do you do first? Like, what are some of the quick wins, things that you can quickly implement and that you also recommend based on your experience to others that are listening to this particular podcast? Say, hey, you go through this digital CS journey. This is where I recommend to do as your first take.
So I think of different components of the scaled customer success or digital customer success program. So it does start with that customer journey. And then it's thinking about how to deliver that customer journey at scale. So that's through combining data, operations, and content. A lot of times the data is not super easy to come by. So it's not a quick win, but I would definitely encourage you to start understanding what data metrics or benchmarks you need to have to be able to drive a more personalized, time-based, and effective customer journey, and start working on collecting that today, whether that's getting the technology in place or working with your data teams. As you're working on that, the quick wins that you can focus on is on that content piece. So providing a lot of different types of content, because people have different preferences and how they like to consume. So this can be, if you start with the existing channels that you might have, knowledge-based articles, write a basic adoption email nurture flow that walks people through, hey, this is the first thing you want to do with our product. This is the second thing you want to do with the product. This is the third thing. And expand on those content resources. Once you have the basics that map what your customer wants to achieve on their customer journey, that's when you can start to enrich it and get a bit more personalized. So at this point, you should have a bit more data so you can trigger those adoption emails based off of if a customer is or is not doing those things. And you can make it a bit more prescriptive to them based off of their use case that you might be capturing or their phase of the journey that they're in. You can also expand on the types of resources to one-to-many or that pooled CS model. And then the third step, which comes down the road, I wouldn't expect you to do as a quick win, is in that predictive phase. So this is where you can start to reference the different content channels that you have. So let's say a customer is engaging in-app. Can you send them an in-app message and not send the email that you maybe had scheduled? Or maybe they engage in the community. How can you audit their customer journey to reference their engagement in the community through an email that they later receive?
There's a pooled CSM. Are those the people that kind of work like just in time, or are those also the ones that deliver the webinars and decide the content? Like, how does the org structure look like to support this engagement model?
So a pooled customer success model, at least at my current company, we have dedicated onboarding with an onboarding manager, and that customer then goes into the pooled CS model if they haven't purchased customer success services. So that means that they have access to this group of customer success managers. If they have questions about their contract or about the products, they need some consultation, they can reach out to a pooled or group inbox, and one of the CSMs will support them. So I think about that from the inbound, but there's another component from the outbound of when we might notify the pooled CSMs that there's risk on an account, and we round robin that risk or that task that needs to be mitigated to one of the CSMs, and then they reach out to the customer to support. So it's a model that helps us manage, over 500 accounts amongst only a handful of CSMs.
Yeah, I want to distinct between a pooled CSM, and thank you so much for sharing this. The distinct between pooled CSM and a portfolio CSM. And this is why I asked this. A pooled CSM model is kind of like just in time. They'll get alerts whenever account needs an engagement. Could be a risk, could be an upsell opportunity, could be they just need some attention so that they can continue adopting the solution. It's kind of like almost a reactive CSM model to alerts, but they're being proactive because they're not waiting for the customer to reach out and say, hey, I have an issue. You're getting ahead of it. A portfolio CSM manager, which is a version of pooled, or a pooled is a version of a portfolio, depends on how you want to look at it and which one was created first. But Salesforce at that time, and also Zendesk, have a portfolio CSM. It's a little bit of a different model. And this is why I asked this. A pooled CSM, the pool of CSM owns a book of business, whereas a portfolio CSM actually has quite a significant number of accounts that they are assigned to, but the assignment is one based on dynamic segmentation. So the pool constantly changes based on various components or criteria, if you will, and it's usually localized. So if you have an international base of customers, the CSM might own everybody in Brazil, but then have an assigned accounts within the Brazil, or like within APAC, let's say, that they deal with. And so they usually use local language when they deliver the webinar or whatever content creation that will translate it for their cohort. And so that's just a big difference. I know we're kind of digressing, but when we talk about scaled CS, actually it's important to denote that there's two types of engagement models that a company can choose. And the main difference is that assigned to the pool versus assigned to the CSM, dynamic segmentation versus just in time, and are they delivering the content and responsible for almost deciding what content to deliver to their cohort versus having a centralized function that delivers and creates the content for everyone in that pool?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because something that we're considering is almost specializing our pooled CSMs. Maybe it would be in that direction of a portfolio CSM, so that one of our pooled CSMs, their portfolio is people who are up for renewal and their specialty is renewals, versus someone else's pool of customers who are primed and ready for expansion and dealing with expansion. So it's something we're considering, just to be a bit more effective with how we task these CSMs.
Yeah, I like that for you. I think that there's something to be said about having specialized roles, renewal manager and expansion manager. You have a very large customer base with smaller ARR or MRR even. And so these specialized roles of having renewal manager, expansion manager makes a lot of sense. Onboarding specialist makes a lot of sense. Even a cancellation team makes a lot of sense in those kind of businesses. And then you have to say, well, the CSM, what is their job? When you start splitting to have specialized roles for specific processes, what is that CSM left with? And usually it's relationship and adoption. So they're responsible for creating success plans, and they're responsible for creating webinars. And then you say, well, you read, we have hundreds or thousands of customers. How can they do a success plan? Well, that's why the portfolio success manager makes sense, because you could, like any given moment, you could say, well, out of the 1,000 customers that you own, 50 needs attention this month or this quarter, and it makes it a little bit more manageable.
I think this is why I also love pairing, whether it's portfolio or pooled CS, with a digital led motion, because it helps them be more effective. So when you brought up building account plans, There are ways that you can guide a customer to create their own account plans through surveying or using tools like Ever After or more of these customer hubs. And then you notice of the customers who are engaging with that, you're collecting that data. You can feed that to the pooled CSM and have them digest it and say, okay, I need to intervene or I don't need to intervene. Or you can also monitor if the customer is not doing it at all, which is a clear sign that you need to intervene, and you can spend some dedicated effort walking them through it.
I love that. Well, you talked a couple of times already about how the motion of scaled CS and digital CS is out. Like the main goal is to increase adoption and maximize value for the customer, smartly define success paths. Perhaps you can kind of share, how do you lead a customer to achieve value with digital CS?
So it all goes back to that customer journey, understanding, what do we want a customer to achieve? What's the value that they want to achieve is probably more important. And then what are the milestones against that pathway to achieve that value? So we then map what content we have. So I was mentioning this earlier, but we map what content we have. So this could be video, this could be in-app messages or guidance, these could be PDFs, webinars, workshops. The list is pretty extensive. So once you understand what you have, and again, if you're just starting out, choose a few key areas and ones that you can easily start building today. So likely that's email and guides in a knowledge base and probably webinars. And then understand, okay, where are the gaps? What do I need to still build? And then you can start to actually deliver that content via prescriptive pathways of email or in-app messages. The cool thing about this is you can also then down the road package this content into learning pathways if you invest in an LMS, or then certifications for your customers to become experts in your product.
Do you pull more levers when a customer is during onboarding and you're trying to get an adoption? Do you find yourself putting more resources into it than maybe when they're in an adoption phase or in year two and they're pretty stable?
The first thing that comes to mind is like, I'm still in building mode. So that's where my mind is. So we're starting again, thinking about that this type of program is best at driving value from the beginning. So always encourage you to start building out that content and nurture pathways and learning pathways from the beginning of the customer journey within onboarding. One, because it's most effective then. And part of that is because customers are the most engaged at that point in the customer journey. They just made a huge investment in your software and they want to make sure that they make the most of it. So capitalize on that when you can. If we think about later on in the customer journey, especially at my current company, we have 3-year long contracts. We want to make sure that we never have a customer that's set it and forget it. Without data and without more operationalized customer success program, it's easy to do that and say, yeah, I had a check-in with them a month ago and they said they're happy. And then you find out at renewal, they're not actually renewing and not happy. So I think a lot of the pieces that I would use in that stage is more about monitoring usage, both from a product usage perspective, but also from a customer perspective of reaching out for NPS or re-engaging with some surveys to see if they're still bought in. And that in itself is a metric, by the way. Have they stopped opening your emails? Have they stopped engaging with the in-app messages? That should be a flag that, yeah, they're no longer checked in and you need to put in a bit more dedicated effort to get them back on the hook.
A lot of time for digital CS beyond in-app messages and blogs and webinars and content type initiatives, which I think you're absolutely right. Data and content is the way to start. We heard a lot of buzz around it 2, 3 years ago. A lot of conversations around community. People buy a product, but they stay for your community. So, what do you think about that? And how much weight does a community play in your scaled CS approach?
This goes back to listening to your customer. I actually came into my current company with community was launched 2 years ago. And I think it was launched from the perspective of it can be many different things, which it can be. But I think when you launch any kind of program without strategic direction, it ends up being none of those things that well. one of my first areas of focus was how do we establish community as a true strategy. So if we think about launching a community, and it can be all these different things, but we're focused on creating community as customer-led best practices, customer-led content, customer-led support, and customer-led networking. So we're establishing it as that piece because if we look at the other sources that we offer to our customers or other channels, that's the secret sauce of community, is it's where our customers are versus our voice as a company. So it's definitely I think a huge lever in creating a scaled approach, and it's something that is, if you can get it working correctly, it has a huge impact on those lagging outcomes that we were mentioning, especially in the internal efficiencies. Because if your customers are supporting each other, that means that they're reaching out to you less and they're self-serving each other.
What's the secret sauce if I'm a software company or a company that wants to create a sense of community or build a community? And I suppose A, you need the right platform. B, you need to have some founding members, very active super user. How do you call that? And how do you get them going?
Yeah, so different approaches work for different places or different users or customers. So definitely one is a big one on platform is think about your customers and where do they live. So I actually created my own community for digital customer success professionals. We're all on Slack. So I created a Slack community. I didn't invest in a separate community that someone would have to create a bookmark for and remember to go to. So do the same for your customers. If you're serving other SaaS companies, maybe consider having Slack as your community, even if it means you don't get gamification or some of these other components that other community platforms offer. You'll find that adoption's a lot easier. Ultimately, it's just about getting people to use community. Another best practice is to do a phased launch or a phased approach. So find a beta group that will create content within the community so that when you expand it to the rest of your community or customer base, it doesn't look like crickets and everyone's kind of waiting for someone to make the first post. It already looks like a lively conversation and they're excited to be a part of it. The third one, especially in early stages, is to offer to ghostwrite on behalf of your customers. So amongst community admins, this has been a tip that I've gotten. So I'm not saying go ahead and make like fake profiles, but of your customers that you know have great customer stories or use cases or questions, reach out to them and ask if they'd be open to you posting on their behalf. Another way is actually to involve the pooled CSMs, create this feedback loop, if you will. So if a customer writes into the pooled inbox with a question that is suitable for the community, have your pooled CSM post that in the community and reference post to their customer and say, hey, I've posted this in the community with an answer, thought more people could benefit from it. In the future, go ahead and post it in the community or search the community first. We're building our pool of answers there.
I'm hearing that you actually put value or content into that Slack channel so that there's a reason for me to get back to it, even if I don't want to chat with anybody or be involved in a community. There's always a reason for me to come back to it. Initially, you put a lot of effort on engagement, sort of like give the feel of a very lively place so that I want to be involved in it. Otherwise, it's kind of like feels like it's dead and it's less alluring.
Definitely. And again, that goes back to the strategy. So within this lower tier of customers, which is where I'm focused on at the moment, these are customers that using our software is not their full-time dedicated job. So if they need help or need have a question or want advice, they want it quick. So they're going to most likely reach out to the pooled CS inbox. So the question is, okay, if we want to encourage them to use our self-service resources or to help each other within community, how do we reinforce that behavior, make it valuable for them? So I think that strategy of making sure that they know that that is the first resource to check, but also giving them almost like carrot on the stick of like, hey, we'll give you the first answer for free. Here it is in the community.
We talked about different aspects of digital CS and scaled CS. We talked about pooled model, the importance of content, omni-channel. If you had to give some tips for anybody that's listening that have the capacity and the willingness, or they have a quite large long tail customer base, any kind of do's and don'ts based on your 5 years of experience and expertise in launching these types of engagement models?
Don't just throw a bunch of CSMs together and say we have a pooled model now. Without the operations to route people to the right person and make sure that people aren't working on the same account at once, it's going to be challenging and ultimately lead to more churn than what you might be currently seeing with dedicated CSMs. A do is definitely invest in those tech stack or data and operations, at least as a foundation. You don't have to go crazy. Progress over perfection is definitely a motto I go by, but do some thinking of how is this actually going to work when a customer emails in and needs help, or how are we going to actually identify risk on these accounts so that we can mitigate that and take action.
One of the things that I've learned that you do as part of like provide value to them beyond the content, obviously, and the webinars is to do health checks, which I think could be a little bit daunting for companies that have a large amount of customers. Maybe you could share a little bit about like what does a health check in this kind of engagement model looks like? It's not going to look like you're doing a deep health check on an enterprise solution. So what does a health check look like in your world, and why do you offer it, and what kind of like results do you see?
Yeah, so I think this is actually a great example of kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. So initially, the health checks were done leading up to renewal as the kind of the trigger of when we would do a health check. A CSM would go into an account and kind of look at how is it performing more from an anecdotal observational perspective. We've now moved into so that was the crawl. Now we're in more of the walk stage. So we have some of these data and analytics so in a dashboard. So they no longer have to do as manual and observational work as going into the accounts, but they can look at the dashboard and quickly understand what's good, what's not good. Maybe there's a run and a sprint. The run where we're going is actually one, moving up those health checks. So looking at them as an initial 30 days coming out of onboarding. So again, instead of waiting till renewal, how can we catch early risk and make sure that they're achieving early adoption? So using some initial kind of 5 touch points, what are the quick things that we need to look for? And then also incorporating those data points into our customer success platform so that if those 5 points are, if any of them are red, it triggers a task that is not necessarily to do the check, but the check's already been automated. And now the action is to actually mitigate that risk and reach out.
The way you scaled the health check is that you completely automated it.
That's correct.
Do you also automate it for your larger accounts?
No.
So obviously you know a lot about this. We talked about so many things, like how do you approach, what do you do in the first 90 days, what's a crawl, walk, run approach for health checks, but also like in general for these programs. Is community part of it? And if so, what makes the community work in your world? And then what have you seen work? What kind of omni channels can we consider? Meeting customers where they are, even org structure. So much packed in this podcast episode. I hope everybody's listening to it, especially if they know they need to double down on digital CS. And by the way, you mentioned you had a Slack channel that's open to anybody that just wants to network and talk about digital CS. So if you want some more members, I'm sure people who are listening to this episode would love to join in. I'll include the link in the description below so you guys can go ahead and apply. If you get approved, you're in. Very, very cool. It was absolutely fantastic. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. I guess the only question looming, and I think everybody else is asking themselves, what are your thoughts around generative AI and scaled CS?
Oh, it's going to be a game changer. I already use AI to write some of these email cadences. You train them on your voice and tone. I think Grammarly AI Pro is quite good with their AI writing. And then from the data perspective as well, there's amazing tools out there with AI to mitigate churn and understand, model basically what's predictive to churn. And it's getting quite accurate, and you can trigger all of your cadences off of it. There's definitely areas that I would like to see improve even more to help with things like localizing all of your content at scale. I've seen some tools out there, but nothing perfect yet for language support. And then content manage or creation, there's a lot of AI support there, but for content maintenance, it seems like that's still a large question mark in a lot of people and my peers that we talk about. How do you manage content maintenance, especially when you have a product that's continuously releasing new UI and new functionality? Hoping to see some generative AI support in that.
Wow, amazing. Like they would just go through all your knowledge base articles and live video training. It's one uplift, like one big uplift to just create all of them. But then you're almost like generating another challenge, which is okay, how do I keep them up to date?
Mm-hmm. And you need a good knowledge management system to make sure you know, okay, this is where it's all that reference or that video is posted, or so it gets pretty hairy.
First of all, you're absolutely amazing. So smart. I think it just comes across very, very clearly the way you articulate yourself. I expect very, very big things from you, Marie. And I appreciate all the tips and the thoughts that you put into coming in today and sharing it with everybody, because I think digital CS, not everybody had the fortune to just dig into it and collect so much experience around this. So this was absolutely a treat.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed chatting with you as well and sharing.
Everyone, if you love this podcast episode, please go on YouTube and give it a like so the YouTube gods know that this was awesome and others should definitely listen to it too. Don't forget to subscribe if you like what you hear and hit that notification button so that you don't miss out on any other awesome conversations that I have with brilliant people like Marie here. All right. And with that, big love for me. I'll see you on the next video.